So, welcome everyone to our COP30 discussion event on delivering solutions. My name's Ethne Childs, and if you don't know me, I'm Head of Communities and Partnerships at the Institution of Environmental Sciences, and I'm going to be hosting the discussion today. So, today's event is the final event in the IES's Road to COP30 online event series, which has brought together environmental professionals to discuss key themes on the climate agenda and identify priorities for action. As I'm sure you'll be aware, COP30 is taking place in Brazil this year from the 10th to the 21st of November. And ahead of the conference, the IES has held four themed discussion events. And the events leading up to this one have focused on reimagining systems, operationalizing finance, and adapting to 1.5 degrees. As I mentioned, the event today will be our final event and it will be focused on delivering solutions. It is widely acknowledged that to meet the scale of the challenge posed by climate change, the focus of COPs must rapidly move from discussion to delivery. We know what we need to do, and there's a strong public mandate for ambitious solutions. This panel discussion and roundtable today will reflect on how we can move from aspiration to action using the pivotal opportunity of COP30 to achieve our climate goals in practice. We are delighted today to have three speakers joining us who will each present on a different topic related to delivering solutions, and we will then move into questions and provide an opportunity for interactive discussion across the group on the theme. This event is designed to be interactive, so please do get stuck into the discussion when we get to that point. Before I introduce our speakers, just a few housekeeping points that I wanted to go over. So we are in a meeting today. So whilst others are presenting, please do mute yourself to limit background noise. But please feel free to have your cameras on, especially when we go into the discussion part. And if you would like to feed into the discussion, please do raise your hand or put something in the chat, and then I can come to you and let you feed in. The same goes for any questions that you might have for our panelists. Just to flag as well that today's event is being recorded and the presentations will be shared. However, the discussion will not be shared and is just being recorded for note-taking purposes. And before COP30, the outcomes of these discussions will be brought together in a position piece, which will be used to brief the IES's delegate who's attending COP30. And the points of these discussion will be aggregated and not directly attributed to any individual. So please feel free to kind of get in and give us your views. Without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, my colleague Joseph Lewis, Head of Policy at the Institution of Environmental Sciences. Joseph works to promote the use of the environmental sciences in decision-making, and he leads the delivery of the IES policy programme, standing up for the voice of science, scientists, and the natural world in policy. Joseph has 10 years of experience in public policy, including in Parliament and the charity sector. He has an MSc in public policy from the University of Bristol, where he specialised in environmental policy, as well as a law degree from Durham University. And he is particularly passionate about science communication and the role it can play in shaping environmental decisions. Joseph, over to you.
Thanks, Ethne. While I'm getting my slides up, two caveats. The first is I'll apologise in advance if I'm a little bit hoarse in the throat and if I have to pause to cough at all, because I, like many of us, am in the COVID recovery at the moment, and so I can only apologise for that. And the second thing I'll apologise for is that today's slides are especially sort of funky and strange because they were made during that period of recovery, and so I can only apologise for any, zany animations. And if anything's at all unclear, we can pick that up during the discussion. Yeah, so delivering solutions, Road to COP30. And since I'm the first speaker, I think I'll talk a little bit about the theoretical element as well of what we really mean by delivering solutions, because I know that some of the others are going to go into a little bit more detail about specific examples and case studies. But hopefully we'll get a bit of all of it. So as an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start by taking almost a step back and talk about the road to COP30. How did we get to where we are now, and where does that place us in terms of this really important conversation about delivering solutions? Then I'm going to talk about why we care about policy delivery, why policy delivery is difficult, what all of those challenges come together as, and give you a case study for delivering solutions and a quick discussion in practice of what the UK has been doing around delivery and where some of the challenges have been around that, but what it also might tell us, bigger picture, as we look about some lessons to learn for global action, but also for the UK going forward, and what we can take away from that as we think about delivering solutions. So to get us started, how do we get here? So as Ethne said at the beginning, this is of course part of an event series called Road to COP30, and road in that is aggressively capitalized because it is R for reimagining systems, O for operationalizing finance, A for adapting to 1.5 plus degrees. And someone said to me the other day, maybe we're on track now for 2, 3. I mean, the UK's just received advice on adaptation that we need to start preparing for 2. So the plus is covering all manner of sins there, isn't it? And then delivering solutions, which is what we're talking about today. So having been to several of these other events, I thought it might be good to start with what are the lessons from those events for this conversation about delivery? And what's that sort of thread, as you can see, that sort of pulls through those conversations right down to the ground. So first off, we talked about reimagining systems. And I think the delivery lesson from this is how can an ambitious systems view inform effective delivery? How can we take that transformative approach to change all the way through from design to delivery? And then when we talked about operationalizing finance, I think for me, the big lesson from that was that finance is sort of such a key driver for this conversation of policy delivery. And the message we got from that event was when people talk, money moves. And when money moves, it also moves this delivery conversation along as well. And then at the adaptation event last week, adapting to 1.5 plus degrees, we talked about integrated delivery, both climate mitigation and climate adaptation, how we can deliver both of those at once to really achieve resilience at the same time as reducing emissions. And that brings us through to today. So the lessons I think we need to bring with us on this journey before we even get to delivering solutions are that our delivery needs to be systemic, ambitious, aligned, and integrated, but also crucially, it needs to be legitimate. It needs to be fair and legitimately decided in line with what people want. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, but you can also go back to the recordings on operationalizing finance and adaptation, where I know we talked about that in quite a bit of detail. So that said, what is policy delivery? Before we can even really get into how we make it happen. Well, if you think about policy as this process by which we want something to happen, we all deliberate for a long time, and from all these different sources, people thinking about something that they want in one place, coming together in order to try and reach a consensus, we eventually, at the end of that process, reach policy, the thing that we want to happen. It's the thing that, through whatever process of deliberation, either we agree needs to happen, or a process that we agree upon for deciding something needs to happen has produced this as the outcome. That's what policy is in the grand scheme of things. And then delivery is taking that out to all of the places that are responsible for making that thing actually happen. Not just being something that we agree wants to happen, but something that actually happens. So in the context of climate change, when we're thinking about big climate policies, once we agree what those are, delivering solutions is all about making that happen in all of the different places needed so that implementation actually happens in practice. And then it's a little bit more complicated in this context that we're talking about today. It's a little bit more context. Come on, slides, come on, technology. It's a little bit more complicated in this context. And that's because there are actually 3 stages to what we're talking about. Because first, everything comes down to the level of these COP summits, these global agreements. And when things are agreed at COP, that's only the first stage, because then it needs to break out apart again, go down to all of these national governments, and each of them needs to agree how they're going to meet these commitments made at the global level, which then needs to filter down to this level of implementation. So one of the things we've talked about in terms of a solution is integrating nature and climate change into a holistic approach to dealing with these big environmental challenges. So if we think that that might be agreed up at this high level, that there could be some kind of global agreement on integrating nature and climate change, as there is, that then needs to filter down to national governments to actually agree what that means to them in how they do that, and then all the way down to implementation. And we'll pick up on that example again maybe in a moment. But there's this extra level of the process that makes delivering solutions even more difficult because it adds one level of complexity to that system. And that produces 3 really important challenges for delivering solutions that I think we need to talk about before we can get to solutions to that. And the first is context and translation. So if we go back to this example of policy that we've got here, the problem is that coming from all of these different sources of deliberation, local communities who want something to happen, people who are experiencing problems firsthand through their resilience or directly seeing the effects of climate change, all of them come together to produce this policy, and then it also needs to be mediated out through implementation. And that means that this idea of policy that we have is not necessarily consistent here as to what it is here or here or here. All of these people might have different ideas of policy, both before it is agreed at the deliberation stage and as it is implemented. And that's because they're dealing with different context in terms of how that policy relates to their interests and lives, but also in terms of what they're trying to achieve out of it. And the process of negotiation that inevitably goes on in creating that policy means different ideas are brought together and come from different places originally. So we have very different ideas, and the result of all of that is that solutions are unique. And so delivering them depends a lot on the context. So a solution to agricultural transition or food transition towards sustainability is going to look really different in Malaysia to how it looks in England or Northern Ireland. And that's going to look completely different to how it looks in the USA or Brazil. And because all of these solutions have different contexts in which they operate, delivery can become really difficult because there is no one size fits all approach to that. And then the second challenge, technology is really it's really going to. I might try this instead. The second challenge is about scale and quantity because there's an awful lot of things going on. So if we think about this model that we looked at before of this really complicated three-stage process of getting through to policy implementation, it's actually a lot more complicated than this because this might be one thing that we agree about. But actually, coming out of a climate summit like COP30, we're going to have loads of different things we're trying to do all at once. We might have the energy transition, the food transition. We might have a transition around transport. We might have a transition around healthcare and its impacts on climate change. It's more specific. And then within each of those, we might have specific policies. We might have a policy around grid connectivity, electrification. We might have a policy around fossil fuels and phasing them out, phasing them away. All of these different policies all need to go through this process of implementation, and we're doing all of it at the same time. So the second big problem is that the sheer quantity of what we need to deliver within these transitions is immense. The third problem then is big systems, which we talk about a lot at the IES, but to give you a sense of that, if we think back to this model we talked about before, and we think about just one of these little arrows of taking something through to delivery, we really tend to think about these things as simple cause to effect, but it's actually in reality a lot more complicated and unintuitive than that in practice, because there might be lots of different drivers that need to contribute in order to make change happen. Or there might be some aspects of a system that actually don't lead to change at all. They actually don't have the effects we want, or they might have unintended consequences. And then there are complicated feedback loops that change the inputs to the system because the things we do to try and create the change we want might alter the conditions in which that system operates. And then there's also unintuitive. It might be that what we think is cause to effect actually is mediated through extra aspects of that system, which are more complicated to deal with. So, for example, we might think that there's some kind of flood defense policy we want in order to achieve resilience to flooding. But it might be mediated through soil conditions, through urban regeneration and other policies like that at the local level. That means it's more complicated to get through. And then a lot of the time, the drivers that feed into these systems are not all controlled by the same people, and we don't always have access to them. They might be controlled by lots of different people, and so it's even more complicated to get into that. And the third lesson then is that systems are complicated. They're complex. So delivering through them is also going to be complex. And these are the big three challenges as I see it for delivering solutions: context, quantity, and complexity. But the good news is that we can deal with those effectively if we move from challenges to solutions. And the first one of those solutions that I'd like to talk about is the case study of our environmental policy implementation community. So this is one of the communities of the IES, EPIC, as its acronym is provided. I didn't come up with the name, but it's a good one. And EPIC is a team up basically of environmental scientists and local authorities to help implement these big environmental policies in practice. And they do things like events, like talking about the effects of underwater noise on the achievement of good environmental status that they did yesterday, a webinar on, or they do big pieces of guidance, like their guidance on integrating air quality and climate change. So if you are a local authority dealing with all of these different issues, this sort of scale challenge where you're trying to do lots of different things at the same time, you're trying to solve these really pressing air quality issues, which have massive health effects for your communities. You're trying to deal with transport, but you're also trying to make a difference for your local community's carbon emissions. Here's how you can do them at the same time. Really clear guidance for local authorities that's already been adopted loads in the last year. And also this week, EPIC's put out a guide on environmental implementation for local authorities, a really clear evidence-led approach to what works for local authorities when it comes to delivering solutions. So really great case study of how a community of practice, one of these great places where you get practitioners, academics, and policy people all in the same place can come together in order to really drive through these solutions, take these challenges, recognize that they exist, but actually just move through them with a lot of confidence and clarity, knowing that you can grapple with these big ideas effectively. The second solution I want to talk about is a little bit more complicated. So we're going to mediate it through this question of whether or not the UK is delivering in practice. And this is, you can take it as a case study for the global level, because a lot of the issues that we're dealing with here in the UK are also issues that are going on at the global level. But I'll take a little step backwards first and just talk about what the UK's approach to delivering these climate commitments is. And a lot of it starts with the Climate Change Act, which is our big sort of marquee piece of legislation. There's lots of other legislation in this area. We won't go into it because it's a little bit too much detail for the conversation we want to have. But there are delivery mechanisms that have sprung out of this particular law. And one of the most important ones are the carbon budgets. These, when brought down to their simplest level, they look something like this, which is a graphic from the Climate Change Committee. And we'll get to image credits and graph credits later on. You can click through on the slides and look at it yourself. But this is their visualization of our carbon budget process. And the really simple idea is you allocate the amount of carbon emissions you're going to have within a certain time window, and that is your budget. And you want to stay below the budget. And it's a really simple and evocative idea for capturing this. But there's a level of technicality beneath that that allows you to actually get into these delivery questions and work out what is the pathway that this country is going to go on in order to get down to its carbon commitments in the long term, which in this case is this goal at 2050, or at least for the time being. And then beyond that level, there's a level of delivery that sort of stems out of that as well. And the first stage is we've got a net zero strategy. And this is a strategy level document. It brings together lots of other ideas and things going on. It is not the policies themselves, the legislation, but it's about that strategic level of taking all of those ideas and saying, how do they get us to these carbon budgets? However, there's a gap there between what is the carbon budget itself and the strategic level view. How do we actually deliver all of these things and do they add up to a whole? And so we have what's called a carbon budget delivery plan. It's a bit of a mouthful. We might call it the CBDP, but BDP is quite difficult to say. So we'll call it the carbon budget delivery plan. And the delivery plan really is about taking these strategic ideas and relating them to how they add up to a collective whole in terms of our ambitions, how they actually deliver solutions, basically. But there have been a lot of challenges for that at the UK level. And the first is that there was legal challenge to the net zero strategy. Going back a few years now, this process started in about 2022. The strategy came out in 2021, almost immediately was challenged. And the first big challenges were that there was a gap in the emission reductions needed under the carbon budgets of 5%. So you can think of that as 1/20th of what we need to do was not being done. So sounds like a relatively small gap, but when you think about the emissions that leads to, it's quite significant. And that obviously adds up holistically in the long term. And also that it was a strategy, it wasn't a delivery plan, because at this time we did not have the carbon budget delivery plan. And as a result of this first legal challenge, we got the carbon budget delivery plan, which was, of course, then also subject to legal challenge because, as found by the court in the eventual instance last year in 2024, the carbon budget delivery plan could not legally claim to enable the delivery of the commitments under these carbon budgets, under the latter of the carbon budgets, obviously not the ones that had already happened, because it was not sufficiently providing that pathway for delivery. And one of the really big issues that came out in that is evaluation of delivery risk. I.e., if you've got a lot of policies which are brought together at this strategic level in your net zero strategy, that strategic document is, of course, assuming that those policies will happen. But there are so many complicated issues in delivery, as we talked about already, that mean that they don't always happen. Politics gets in the way. Sometimes when we actually monitor and evaluate against policies, they didn't do everything that we thought they would, all because of these big systems that we're talking about here, both the political and social systems, but also those natural systems that we're dealing with. And the result of that is that we're now expecting revisions to the carbon budget delivery plan. And they are technically speaking due this month, but there is an asterisk there because, as we know, things do not always materialize when they are due in the world of policy. But we should be due relatively soon to get revisions to the carbon budget delivery plan. And in terms of what we can expect to see in those revisions, we ought to see a lot more of the quantification. How do policies contribute to meeting those objectives and, in particular, filling these gaps that historically we might think exist in the UK's commitments to decarbonisation? As well as some of these evaluative assessments, particularly around delivery risks and how the Secretary of State feels that whoever they are at the time, currently it's Ed Miliband. Uh, how do they feel that? How do they feel satisfied that this carbon budget delivery plan has enabled them to meet delivery? So a whole bunch of technical things there. We won't see in this, by the way, any adjustments to pathways or policy or any new policies probably because it is about delivering what already exists. It's not about creating new things, but it's about working out how we mediate that complicated environment. Um, and all of this is very technical and complicated, but it boils down to a really simple lesson to learn, which is around governance. It's around how we take these very abstract ideas of the thing that we agree needs to happen. If you think back that policy in the middle of the diagram, how do we take that out and get it out to all the places and all of the people that need to be doing things to make it happen? Some of whom we control and some of whom we don't. Um, and that's the role of good governance. If you have a system that is set up to deliver, it's going to deliver outcomes effectively and reliably. And we can see in this case study that legal and political accountability are a really important part of that picture. Because if we think forward to a future where we are dealing with increasing uncertainty, challenges to the consensus coming from the political sphere, even if we still do have a strong public consensus around a lot of these policies, increasingly there is uncertainty around delivery in the future that can be resolved by these points of legal and political accountability, which can help to ensure that this delivery pathway is a lot more certain than it might otherwise be. And it helps us to mediate these complex systems as well. And then I clicked the wrong way. And then the other thing that it should tell us is that environmental science, all of us, have a tremendous amount of power in this conversation about delivery. And it comes in two forms. And the first is that we can produce pathways based on evidence. We can fill in these gaps in a carbon budget delivery plan or anything else to really model ahead and get an understanding of how these things contribute upwards to a holistic whole, solving this big systems problem because we can cut through that complexity with science. And then, secondly, that science can really cut through the politics of it as well in these legal challenges where things are more based on the technical nature of things. And the courts in these cases have shown a lot of deference to the science, to bodies like the Climate Change Committee. And it's a really clear example of the role that science can play when it is teamed up with the right allies in this environment and when you're convening the right people to work together towards this goal of governance. So, solving these delivery challenges can be quite simple. If context is a challenge, if we think solutions need to adapt to a local context, so we can't always know what we need to do, then local innovation, local leadership, and communities of practice can help to support that delivery and make it more effective. If we think that quantity is a problem, the scale of the challenges that we need to address at the same time, if we need to solve so many problems at once, then we need quantification, we need delivery plans to ensure that everything adds up so we can speed ahead with delivery without worrying if we're actually getting where we're meant to. And if complexity is a challenge, if solutions need to fight through complex systems, then governance and accountability can help to align those systems with delivery to make sure that they are doing what they need to do. We need bottom-up leadership and innovation, whilst also having top-down governance and accountability. And indeed, we need bottom-down governance and bottom-up governance and accountability, and we need top-down leadership and innovation as well. A full circle around the issue of delivering solutions. And right in the middle of that, science in the middle to provide evidence of what works and pathways that help us to get there, empowering both of those sides of things. And all of that coming together makes me think about the work that we did a couple of years ago, looking at the future of environmental science, where we talked about a vision of the future where environmental scientists are knowledgeable, where they're skilled, diverse, trusted, with a clear role and a clear mandate to help people solve environmental challenges, co-create a sustainable society where people and nature thrive. And that's right at the heart of this issue of delivering solutions, is that environmental science needs to be a partner to that. And we need people from environmental science communities, environmental professionals across the board, involved in finance, involved in delivery and implementation, working with local authorities, convened in many different places and forms to help get this delivery forwards. So to summarize my sort of introductory thoughts, we need solutions which are systemic, ambitious, aligned, integrated, and legitimate. Delivery has slowed down. It's been slowed down by context, by quantity, and by complexity, and of course by politics. But we can still deliver as long as we have local leadership, communities of practice, quantified delivery plans, and good governance. The key core message of that, which slowly is appearing on the screen though, is that policy delivery is the core challenge of this decade, but we do have the tools that we need, so we should get on and do that. And if you want to chat to me anymore, because I know some of you will be watching this on a recording afterwards, my email's on the slides there, and so you can talk to me about it anytime. Always happy to think how we can help to deliver solutions. Here are some image credits. Have a look at those. Isn't that great? And then that's my slides done. And so I am finished.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for that brilliant presentation exploring the pathway from international governance and commitments through to national policy and then implementation and delivery on the ground. I think a lot of really important messaging there around how solutions can actually be implemented that come from these big commitments and policy drivers that we have. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure that there will be some thoughts and questions from our attendees as well. So a reminder that you can either type these in the chat box through Zoom and I can pose those to Joseph at the end of our presentation. Or if you have direct thoughts, please do put your hand up at the end and we can hear from you as well. But we'll revisit some of those points in the panel discussion. Thank you so much, Joseph. Next up, I'm going to hand over to our next speaker, and we're going to hear from Alice Doyle, a chartered environmentalist and sustainability consultant advising SMEs on the Making Business Greener campaign, which is funded by the NatureSave Trust. Alice will be talking about the key roles that SMEs have in tackling the nature and climate crisis. It's worth mentioning as well that Alice is also a member of our Climate Action Community Steering Group, and I'll put a link in the chat once she gets going about that community. Thanks, Alice. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. I'm just going to share some slides. They aren't quite as dynamic because I too have been off sick. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Making Business Greener campaign, and I basically work with SMEs, and this is funded. So this is a screenshot of my fundies, which is basically the NatureSave Trust. So it's kind of there so everyone can see what it is. This campaign has been running for about 25 years actually, and it was created by the NatureSave insurance company. And what that company wanted to do was to have a charity arm to fund environmental initiatives. So this campaign was created then. It's always been called the Making Business Greener campaign. They've just like rebranded everything. And I've been running this since 2012. So as you can imagine, in that period of time, there's been a lot of different changes. We started off with doing audits, then it became a One Planet Living framework, and now I'm working on decarbonisation, net zero, giving general sustainability advice. And it ranges from like mentoring, coaching, and it's really adaptive to whoever joins onto this funded programme. So basically what we found is by definition, the NatureSave insurance clients are all mainly SMEs. That's the area they deal with, and they are crucial to reaching net zero. And a core component of the work at NatureSave Insurance is to support the business clients to a more sustainable future, but also to lower their exposure to risk, climate risk, flood risk, heat risk, which is a lot of what this focus on. And the majority of the clients are SMEs. So this is the area I work in. I also work in a college group as well, as the environmental manager. So it's just to show that a small business can have a huge positive impact. It may seem minimal when compared to the activity of the 100 businesses responsible for, I think, 71% of global emissions. However, the aggregate of all of these SMEs is huge. So if we think these stats here a couple of years ago, they make up 90% basically of businesses worldwide, and in the UK, I've averaged up, it's 99.9. So SMEs have a huge role in reducing carbon emissions. And many of the people that I work with, they come through this program because they've come through to NatureSafe and NatureSafe Trust because their values align, and they're already wanting to make steps to address climate change and improve sustainability, but they don't know how. And also, we have to think that SMEs don't operate in a vacuum. They are all supplying larger companies with products and services. They are part of their supply chain. So in part of that, they're going to be part of the Scope 3 emissions, which can at most represent up to 90% of an organization's carbon footprint. So we can see just how crucial these SMEs can be in reducing that overall Scope 3. And also the hardest to reduce as well. So as large companies become more accountable to supply their carbon ESG data with their annual financial filings, SMEs are contributing to that supply chain. So they are also under pressure to decarbonize and provide carbon inventories to the customers, especially what the larger ones are at the moment. Also, smaller businesses are they're more nimble. They could be more entrepreneurial. They can develop low carbon and circular economy business models. They're not under such pressure to move more slowly. They can be a lot more adaptable to the market. And they also, in terms of community, a small business can often form the backbone of a local community by increasing cohesion. Local businesses tend to support other local businesses. They create a local economy, jobs, and they help keep a vibrant, healthy community. So addressing carbon emissions and prioritizing sustainability in the supply chain can feel to them like an overwhelming task. So this is why we've developed this Making Business Greener campaign. The main aim is to remove those barriers that SMEs have. They don't get funding for this. They don't have the resources. So a survey by SME Climate Hub basically was looking at what the barriers were to reducing emissions. And most SMEs cite this lack of resources. This is exactly why we've developed this Making Business Greener campaign. Another one was right skills. They just don't have it in-house. It's not possible to send people out for training. And there's obviously more priority issues. And then knowledge and time. So there's a whole plethora of reasons why an SME can't address these areas, yet they want to. Also, SMEs, they can work on a shorter investment cycle. So they can make, short-term investment into environmental and sustainability programs. So just sort of looking at the stats, you can see here the enormous potential and clout. I also do some work with Blue Patch, the Sustainable Business Network, and that's really beginning to grow quite fundamentally. So as an aggregate, there's a huge amount of potential here as a solution to basically work on low carbon products, services, and within that supply chain. So Scope 3, this is where it's very difficult, the Scope 3, to unpick, but this is where a lot of the fundamental clout can lie. So an SME may be small, but their supply chains aren't. A lot of the emissions in an organisation will be in Scope 3, what we buy, use, throw away if we don't recycle, and it counts for everything in the supply chain. So basically mapping your supply chain, starting with the larger suppliers, obviously, but it can make huge changes incrementally. Um, so yeah, supplier emissions dominate footprints basically for most sectors, and better purchasing can shift into these more kind of low carbon life cycle analysis type products. Also, the pressure the SMEs can also leave a pressure as well by asking to see disclosure from companies too. So I'm just going to sort of come back again to this Making Business Greener campaign. So I've worked with probably 500 to 600 organizations now. We're constantly evolving this program. It just went through a new kind of evolution a couple of years ago to become this more sort of nimble counseling, slight mentoring type business. And what I'm finding is most people are coming to me because they're in government procurement portals, NHS tenders, local authority tenders. I'm finding a lot of charities, especially, are all needing the same sort of information, which tends to be now a plan for a plan. So it's how are they going to? They need their sustainability strategy, but they need the plan to make that sustainability strategy happen. So I tend to try and mentor and coach people through that and create really easy, manageable steps. Because what I'm also finding is that for a small organization that wants to do the right thing, they can suddenly start trying to do their carbon footprint, and they'll get into carbon freeze because they find it too overwhelming. There's too much to report on. They don't have the resources. So this service is very much about trying to support SMEs through their carbon reporting, sustainability strategy, policy writing, community engagement, staff training and planning. And so at the governance level, it's totally embedded across an organization. What I'm also finding with SMEs is that the smaller they are, the harder it is sometimes to report on their carbon emissions, because the larger ones that have got more of a kind of footprint, there's more data available. So for the smaller SMEs, which could be, 5 to 10 to 15 people, that can sometimes be the hardest, especially if they've got disparate offices, working from home, that type of thing. So there's a number of different hurdles. So sort of going back to what Joseph was saying about tailored solutions, I'm finding it is very much about this tailored solution by sector, by size, by what they do. And it's all the same things that I'm delivering, but it's very much tailored and bespoke to whoever I'm dealing with. So when I have a consultation with somebody, we start off by looking at how we're going to tailor that piece of work. So those are my slides. I'm just going to try and find my stop share. And yeah, I've just found that this has just been really sort of powerful, and we get a lot of sort of word of mouth recommendations as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more of this work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. Again, really useful to hear about the role of small and medium businesses and how they can support the delivery of climate ambitions, and their kind of role in delivering solutions, both through their own sustainability plans and through influencing others, which I thought was a good point that you made there. A reminder to all our attendees, if you have any questions for Alice, please do put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand later, or if you just have any reflections on any of the presentations so far. I'm now really pleased to invite our final speaker to come forward. I'm pleased to introduce Dan Lee. Dan is a chartered environmentalist and energy and climate consultant for SLR. His role and interests focus on renewable energy, climate change mitigation, environmental impact assessment, and nature-based solutions. And today, Dan's presentation will discuss how stakeholder collaboration can drive the renewable energy transition. I'll just get your slides up.
Thank you. So first off, Ethne, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. So like Ethne mentioned, my presentation is about stakeholder collaboration and how it can really drive the energy transition. So essentially, technology isn't the problem. We found that certainly collaboration is. So we already have the tools to transform energy systems. We've got the turbines, the solar panels, the batteries, but what we're really struggling with across governments, industry, community, and different disciplines is actually working together. So as we approach COP30 in Belém, nearly 100 countries have now prepared new climate targets, so all their NDCs. and 78% of them have mentioned renewable energy, and this just definitely presents huge progress. So we've got to celebrate that first and foremost. But there's a big gap still between that ambition and the delivery. So the world pledged at COP28 to triple renewable energy and double efficiency by 2030, which is a huge ask. Yet at the current pace, we're not even halfway to delivering that. So the problem isn't a lack of ideas or targets, it's actually how we work together to deliver them. So, and I think many people, including myself, feel definitely a little bit disillusioned with previous COPs. We've seen a lot of pledges, we've had so many promises, but what we really now need is less of the kind of the rewriting of texts and more actual delivery on the ground. So today I'm just going to talk about how that collaboration can really bridge that gap. So my talk is going to focus on why collaboration is vital to the energy transition and what happens when it breaks down. Next, I'm going to look at some UK and global case studies. So what works, what doesn't, and what can we learn? And then thirdly, I'm going to look at why ethics and equity really matter and how we can then integrate them into climate action as well. And then I'm going to finish with a call to action for COP30. So next slide, please. So why collaboration matters. So when we talk about the renewable energy transition, it's really easy to focus on the technology, but essentially the truth is we already have most of the tools that we need. So the real challenge now isn't about inventing the new technology, it's getting better at essentially working together. So collaboration matters because the transition cuts across everything. So it could be energy, planning, finance, nature, lots of different communities are affected as well. So no single organization, no sector can deliver it alone. Essentially, as we all know, that lots of projects sit at the crossroads of government, business, science, and society. And when collaboration works, things tend to move quickly. But when, for example, projects get built, jobs are created, communities benefit directly. But when it doesn't, progress really does slow, like plans stall, trust fades away, and that ambition turns a lot into frustration, as I'm sure many of you feel the same. So collaboration is how we connect that local action to those national goals, and then it's again that kind of top down, so that ambition to actually the delivery as well. So it gives projects shared purpose and also the social license that they actually need to succeed. And it's what keeps the transition fair, it keeps it inclusive and also resilient. It's not all about speed. So before we look at the barriers, it's worth remembering the collaboration isn't a nice to have, it's the thing that's holding everything together. So yeah, can you go on to the next slide, please? So there is unfortunately barriers to collaboration. So when it does break down, delivery does as well. So in the UK, a prime example of that is when policy and practice aren't joined up, would be the onshore wind ban. So that was in effect between 2010 and 2019. And that almost halted a decade worth of progress in the onshore wind sector. So hundreds of projects were shelved, communities lost income opportunities, and unfortunately our renewable energy, the energy mix itself became very over-reliant on solar and to a lesser extent offshore wind too. So also at the same time, you've got the actual physical infrastructure for the energy transition. So that's as what many people call the grid problem. So that's essentially the backbone of it. So it's been completely overwhelmed now for several years. So we've got about 770 gigawatts of projects are stuck in the national grid's connection queues. So I've worked on projects with connection dates, but pushed back to the mid to late 2030s. So that's really showing the scale of that physical issue that we have. They're not engineering failures as such, they're more coordination failures. So that's a failure between the regulators, so Ofgem, the developers, the local authorities and the communities, that they're not communicating well, and the regulatory reform needs to be improved drastically there. And suppose, and also underneath those technical issues is something even more critical. It's the loss of the social license for projects. So too often projects are designed for communities, not with them. So consultation comes in really late, the benefits are really small, and the trust erodes. So without that genuine collaboration between the policymakers at the top who set the direction, investors who are funding it, the scientists who are actually validating it, and the communities that live it on the ground, the transition is risking becoming a failure, not an actual lived reality. Next slide, please. But we've got some good news. We've got some examples which show how it can actually be done differently. So the UK offshore wind sector deal was one. So that was an example that brought together the government, it brought together industry and research bodies to create a shared plan for growth. So that was from 2015 onwards. So that set clear capacity targets for developers, and it invested in training, and it really built a sustainable supply chain that kept jobs here in the UK and kept this investment stable and ensured the technology progressed. So that combination of clear policy and shared ownership turned offshore wind from very much a niche industry into a national success. So it now employs over 30,000 people. It provides affordable, low carbon energy to millions across the country. So it's a prime example of where we've got it right. Now I'm going to drop down to the community level. So somewhere close to home for me in Cornwall. It's a company called Community Power Cornwall. So it's a brilliant model. So it's essentially it's a collaboration that allows local residents to co-own and invest in renewable energy projects. So that means the profits stay in Cornwall and they support local social projects, and they actually build pride in the transition on a kind of grassroots level. So again, this is focusing on, it's not all about the energy, it's about the empowerment as well to make things happen. And also when you're looking at innovative projects, so for example, again, I'll use a Cornish example. There's a project in United Downs in West Cornwall, which was the UK's first deep geothermal project. And it's one that our company and previous company, we in our office, I'd say my managers were very much involved at the conception stage through to the delivery of that. So that was a 12-year project. So the success here was powered by that collaboration from the very start. So you had geologists, you had engineers, you had investors, and local residents all working together. So sitting in the same room talking, and essentially removing those barriers before they got problematic. And it's really a reminder when people are part of the process, again, from the beginning, that innovation and inclusion can go hand in hand and really drive progress. So I suppose those examples from the very top national level down to the local shows that collaboration isn't abstract, it's practical and it does work. And it's the difference between projects that succeed and then those who all too often fall over. Next slide, please. Okay, so zooming out, there's also a bigger picture here. So COP30s won't just be about new targets, it's about how those targets are actually delivered and who they benefit. I think that's a really key point, because the reality is a poorly managed energy transition can actually make inequalities worse. And we've seen evidence of that happening, unfortunately. So for example, in Argentina, there was a $4 billion publicly funded World Bank program to boost mineral extraction in the country. Unfortunately, it ended up triggering really serious social and environmental conflict because the capital flowed in quickly. The companies were trying to make as much money as they can and capitalize on this startup money. And there was a real disconnect between that engagement on the ground and then the actual extraction. So there was reports of land grabs. There's water contamination issues, and unfortunately, violation of indigenous rights as well. And I think with COP being at, in Belen, it's positioned at the edge of the Amazon rainforest. I think that's something really important that we should all be, in the world, should be considering when we're developing these supply chains for extraction these critical minerals. But it isn't all bleak. So evidence shows that many renewable companies are actually starting to integrate their ethical standards, recognizing that community trust is essential for the stable investment. And essentially, progress is happening. It's not everywhere, and it's not happening fast enough. But I think the key message from this section is simple. If we don't de-risk the transition for communities and workers on the ground, not just the investors, we'll repeat the same mistakes that we had with past industrial revolutions. This is a real key point. Next slide, please. And so what can we take from all of this? So first off, collaboration is what turns ambition into action. So technology is going to keep improving inevitably, but it's more importantly, it's our ability to actually work together across governments, industry and communities that will decide whether COP delivers real results. The second point, collaboration only works when people have a stake in that success. So that means involving communities from the very start, not just at the ribbon cutting stage of projects. Again, empowering that bottom-up approach so they feel like they've got ownership and accountability as well. And third, ethics and equity, they can't be side notes in any of this. When we're looking at supply chains and critical minerals, they're really kind of central to building trust and unlocking the partnerships that we need to scale up renewables at the speed and the scale that we need. Because in the end, collaboration isn't just about that coordination, it's about connection, because at the end of the day, it's about people and it's our shared future together. So I think that's one thing that's often missed in these conversations. And just looking at what we can do as a group of environmental professionals, we can't be bystanders in this. We've got to be connectors to bridge that gap between the science, the policy, and society as well. And our role is to make sure that the transition isn't just fast, but fair as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was a really powerful message to end on there about the role of environmental professionals in supporting climate ambitions. And I think a really good focus for presentation on the renewable energy transition, which, as you say, is often very much focused on technology. So great to hear about the more kind of social and collaborative element to that. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of our speakers, Joseph, Alice and Dan. You've been so brilliant today. I've really appreciated all of your insights. And I think some really strong messages coming out of this about the importance of collaboration and connection, the importance of strong implementation and delivery, and the importance of working with business and all stakeholders to really deliver a climate transition that works for both people and nature. So a massive thank you to that. And thank you to all of those for attending as well. And for those of you viewing online, if you have any views after this, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Joseph. We're always really keen to hear your reflections and your thoughts. As I mentioned, everything we've discussed today and in our other events is going to be used to inform our work ahead of COP30. And as I mentioned, the outcomes of these discussions will be brought together in a position piece, which will also be used to brief the IES delegate who will be attending COP30 and really getting involved in these discussions. If you're interested in getting a bit more involved in the work of the IES, and we've heard today about the importance of communities of practice and of connection across the sector and others, then please do consider joining our climate action community. As I mentioned, Alice is on our steering group for that group, and it would be great to have you involved and to kind of deliver on some of these aims that we've talked about today. I did post a link in the chat about that community, but you can also just drop me an email and I can provide you some more information. For now, that's it from us today. Again, thank you so much to our speakers. Thanks for logging in. If you are an IES member, don't forget to record your attendance using our CPD tool, which you can find in the IES members area of the website. And if you're not, please do consider joining the IES as a member and supporting our work and your professional development. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.